Hello, everyone, and good morning or good afternoon, depending on what part of the country or world you're in. Thank you for joining us with Sales Hacker. We've got Mohit here, our founder and creator of MindTickle. It is 11 o'clock. We're going to give it about another 60 seconds, just in case people are jumping out of meetings and trying to log into this one. In the meantime, if you have questions you definitely know you want to ask, please go ahead and start putting them in the box on the right-hand side of your screen. All right, everybody. Well, thank you so much for joining us. We're very excited. It's another fantastic day. We've got an awesome webinar planned for you today with Mohit Garg from MindTickle. I've personally known Mohit for the last couple of years when he was coming in with this idea of sales enablement and trying to help teams be more efficient and effective and onboarding and all this great stuff. So I've known him for a couple of years, so I'm really excited to participate on this one. My name is Richard Harris. I am with Sales Hacker. I'm the Director of Sales Training and Consulting over here. Mohit, you are the CEO and founder of MindTickle. I just want to say, make sure that everyone's in the right webinar. So a little bit like Southwest Airlines. If you are looking for the webinar on new toe fungus removal, this is not the webinar for you. This is the one about sales onboarding and enablement. And specifically, it is the 6 ways that top sales organizations are closing more deals by using enablement. So Mohit, before we get started too, for those who stick around through the end of the webinar, we will absolutely have a special offer specifically from MindTickle so that you can get a taste of what they're really offering and understand how it can really help you. So hang on tight and we'll let you know how that goes. Mohit, how are you today?
Very good, Richard. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited about the webinar today. It's a great opportunity to share some of the very interesting trends we've picked up, some very interesting examples I want to share with the audience today. And most importantly, it's great to be part of the Sales Hacker community. So it's a flourishing community. Very happy to be contributing to it.
Great. Well, we're glad to have you, and thank you for taking some time. You know, it is the end of the quarter. It's the end of Q1, so thank you for being here. And again, thank you to all the people who are listening in to take the time out to joining us.
I know.
So let's start at the beginning. So, you know, we hear this word sales enablement, right? This is the new hot buzzword. And every few years, sales and startups create new words for same old stuff. You know, it used to be called onboarding. Now it's called enablement. When I first started in sales, it was just called training. So from your perspective, can you tell us what enablement really means?
Yeah, absolutely, Richard. And I think that's a great place to start because one of the things I want to do is level set with the audience on how we are framing it in the market and how our customers are driving a lot of value. That is because enablement is a really broad term and it can mean a lot of things. If you look at just sales enablement, it encompasses everything that you could be doing to make your salesperson more efficient and effective. Now, my special interest and the message I want to bring to the webinar today is on the effectiveness side of things, right? So while there are several tools which make a sales rep do more activities in an hour, track emails, share collateral with prospects in a shorter period of time, effectiveness is where you work backward from outcomes, right? So it's not just onboarding. It's about looking at the entire life cycle of a salesperson and looking at how are they effective in the outcomes they're producing in sales conversations, whether it's articulating the value proposition to a prospect in an elevator pitch, handling objections, presenting how the solution makes sense in the context of the customer's needs. So that's how we're framing up the enablement picture. And we have come up with a new term. I won't say we've coined it. We have borrowed it from how it's been used in this context earlier. But we're a big believer in sales readiness. So we believe as it relates to the learning, coaching of sales teams today, the objective we should be aspiring towards is sales readiness and not necessarily sales enablement. It can mean a lot of things.
Yeah, I agree, and it's funny because I teach this a lot, is that there's a difference between efficiency and effectiveness.
Totally.
And for the last 3 years, we've been working on efficiency, you know, not to a point of illness or ad nauseum. We've needed it. Sales has certainly needed it. But we've forgotten effectiveness. And what I've seen is that there's all these great tools to get you into a conversation.
Oh, yeah.
But then if you don't know how to have this conveation, all you're really doing is accelerating the suck.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
Don't accelerate the suck. Let's make sure that you have good conversations with people.
Yeah, exactly.
why do you think it's changed? Like, what in the last couple of years are you seeing that even just sort of, made the light bulb go off for you?
Yeah. And again, there are several contributory factors here, but the two that particularly stand out, right? So the two most important drivers of change, which are increasing the need for great sales readiness, is number one, which many people talk about, is the dynamic nature of information that salespeople have to deal with today, right? So if you think about business cycles is a time in which a company reinvents itself, right? So if company is looking at going into new sectors, new products, this could happen every 3 years, 5 years, like if you go back 20 years back. But today, companies are reshaping their products, retooling their pitches. They are responding to new objections, new competitors on a constant basis, right? So earlier, it was adequate to have an episodic training strategy, right? You could train your sales team every quarter or with a bi-weekly webinar, and that was sufficient. Today, you need to be more agile. So you need to have an agile process and technology for bite-sized, regular reinforcement, field communications. So the first driver is the dynamic nature of information that salespeople have to deal with today. It's much more fast-paced. And the second is, and we talk about that a lot, right? So I've seen several blogs, even Sales Hacker, where we're talking about how the nature of the sales process has changed. Buyers are more aware, prospects are less responsive to cold contact. So salespeople have to be more creative. They have to really understand the power of their applying problem solving in the context of their customers' needs. They need to be more knowledgeable about product. They need to be more knowledgeable about competition. They need to understand how to navigate complex selling. In a trial and buy scenario, you can't hide anything from your prospect. So you got to know your content. You got to know your stuff. So hence the need for better and strong enablement, more so than it's ever been.
Yep, that's great. So I've got one question that may have two parts.
Yeah.
And the question is, when or where do you start? Like, when do you start with sales enablement, right? Like I said earlier, I met you early on, and you only had a handful of people. When does the company get to the size where you need to actually start with sales enablement? And then more importantly, you've got all this stuff. You've got marketing messages and brand and sales pitches and objection handling and it's a lot of stuff. How do you get where do you start on both pieces of that?
Yeah. So if you talk about when you make investments in sales readiness, that actually starts on day one, when you bring your first salesperson on board, right? So the more interesting question is, how do you start investing into a scalable and standardized method of sales enablement, right? I mean, we may not call it enablement, but the moment you have your first salesperson through the door, it's not the founder selling or the CEO selling, you have to start enabling that person. Right, that's the obvious thing. So I'm kind of stating the obvious. But you got to be looking at a few indicators. The indicators you're looking at is, have you established true product market fit? Do you have a sales team that's larger than fits into a small meeting room, right? Or you could be looking at, is my sales team now distributed across more than one location? In some cases, your indicators may come from your loss analysis. If your loss analysis is starting to show gaps in execution, where you lost because of reasons you shouldn't have lost for, then you're looking at gaps in your sales enablement strategy, right? To be more specific, you may start with a scalable strategy with as few as 5 or 10 salespeople in your team. But at MindTickle, we started when we hired our first sales rep, right? We've been dogfooding our product on day one because we're true believers in the value of sales enablement. You could start by focusing on very specific actions such as product information, buyer personas. Over a period of time, your sales enablement strategy will evolve to cover the full gamut, right from onboarding, messaging, continual ongoing reinforcement and learning. But you don't have to do everything to begin with, right? It's a good habit. It's good to start early, but obviously it has to make sense where you are able to commit the time and resources to a cadence on this process. So the cadence and regularity is very important.
Great. I'm going to make a quick technology change. People are telling us they're getting an echo.
Oh, is that right?
So that's great. I'm hoping this is a better sound for everyone. Sorry for the big beats, everybody. But what is the low-hanging fruit in sales enablement? What do you see in that? What's the things that people can start quick and easy? I know we had a conversation about what's tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 of sales enablement.
Yeah.
How do you see that?
Yeah. Again, it depends on the nature of your sales team and your growth plans. So if you have a very aggressive hiring plan, right, you're at 50 reps or 20 reps looking to go up 2x, 3x in a year, right? Your biggest low-hanging fruit may come from making onboarding more structured and shortening the ramp time. That could be the focus of that 6-month period of investing into sales enablement, right? Several of our hyper growth customers fall in that category, right? For distributed teams, the focus may be, let me start by ensuring that I have 2 offices, 3 product lines, 2 verticals. So that's a combination of 12 different messages my team may be taking to the market. Can I ensure that there's a consistent baseline of the message that's been played out? And it's not about scripting the message, it's about codifying the message. In my elevator pitch, are my sales reps touching upon the top 3 areas, how we are positioned in the market? What is essential to differentiate from the noise from competitors in the market, right? So in that case, your low-hanging fruit is in codifying the message through a video-based or audio-based role play. That could be a place to start. If you have, let's say, a channel go-to-market, so some of our customers who are in the technology infrastructure space, hardware solutions, they have a primarily channel-based go-to-market program. Now they're starting with a low-hanging fruit on certification of channel partner sellers, right? So it depends on what is your go-to-market. The biggest hanging fruit may be in any of these categories, with a primarily field staff, such as think about insurance, retail. You may start with just mobile updates, providing small bite-sized chunks of information about campaigns. But you touched upon tiers of enablement, right? So think of this as a maturity continuum. So what we find is we actually have a sort of audit or a readiness index, which we can go into organizations and determine where they are on a 5 scale. Tier 1 is very functional. It's about an organization which says, if my rep went through a certain training and a checkbox, they are enabled. If my new hire went through boot camp, they are onboarded. Now that's very functional, right? Tier 2 is activity-based, where organizations are starting to look at some analytics, or they're looking at the fact that this person has gone through some dry runs, shadowed an experienced sales rep, or addressed some trouble tickets before they get on the sales calls. So this person is now onboarded. That's a tier 2 type of determination. Now the higher level, tier 3, 3, 4, they go into outcomes. So now you're working backwards and saying, is my rep closing a deal? So maybe it could be time to first deal close for onboarding perspective, or it's time to quota. So the most mature organizations are saying my rep is considered onboarded when they start hitting quota. So when 2 companies say that I have a 3-month ramp time or 7-month ramp time, the question we ought to be asking is, which tier of sales readiness is the organization on? Are they talking about time to completion of training, or time to quota, or time to first deal close? It could be a lot of things.
That's great. I love how you're sort of breaking that down, because we hear people say onboarding and ramp time, and nobody actually finds it, right? And I think I've learned this a lot in the last few years, particularly in sales, is that in many ways that even when you define an onboarding process or a ramp time, your real goal is to say, let's define it as a hypothesis, and then let's test it. And I think this is where you guys really help accelerate that. Right, the accuracy of that ramp time. If you can save someone's ramp time by a week or 2 weeks in their onboarding time, and you can improve it, that does wonders for the bottom line. Particularly when you're selling, 6-figure SaaS deals. That's 1 or 2 extra weeks a year is what everybody wants. I don't know anybody who gets the last week of December and go, gosh, I wish I didn't have 1 more week to go, right?
Exactly.
So that's great.
There's some interesting numbers here. So we did some math back of the envelope where we said for a 50% sales team going to 100 in a year, which is very typical in fast-growing companies, right? If you were to shrink the ramp time by 2 months, going from typical 7 months in the Valley to 5 months, which MindTickle has demonstrated, you create 8% more selling capacity that year. So I'm not saying 8% more revenue, right? So you've created 8% more selling capacity. So if you're a team of 100, you would have had to hire 8 few people to sell the same amount of sales. So that's very powerful. And we have customers such as Avalara who measured before a structured onboarding program to after implementing a structured program with MindTickle, they have seen a 41-day reduction in their ramp time. So there is data.
41 days?
41 days, right? So
wow.
I talk about a couple of weeks. Here we're talking about a good more than a month saving of
6 weeks.
Yeah.
That's amazing. That they must be thrilled with you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great relationship.
Time to raise their prices.
Oh, we'll hold off on that.
Yeah, sorry if they're listening. It was just a joke. Sorry.
Yeah.
So I've got a question coming from the audience, but I want to ask this one first. So content really matters for implementations, right? What if it's, and particularly with some of these early stage startups,
right?
Where do you start? It's all in your head, right? You're like, we hear that, and I say this a lot, that, and you might have experienced this, that oftentimes, in an early stage startup, the prospect, the early adopters are buying the vision of the CEO as much as they're buying the actual service itself, right? So where do you start with sort of trying to take all that stuff out of Mohit's head and, get it into the arms and hands of your sales reps and SDRs? Where do you start?
Yeah. And we get this question a lot. So when we are working with our prospects and they see the value, right? So they see the shiny object to say, this is the holy grail where I need to be, right? So sales enablement, which is comprehensive, works like a charm. But how do we get there, right? And the question they're really asking is, I have a scattered environment where I have either no content or little content, and it's scattered, right? Some of this is in a document repository. Some of this is a CMS. The challenge is they are using a definition of content which is very different from the definition that we believe serves the market well, right? So an example is a case study, right? So a prospect will say, our marketing has not published as many case studies as we would like, so we don't have content, right? The reality is salespeople do not need case studies to be educated on how to sell. What they need are success stories. The difference between a case study and a success story is a success story is organic. It is human. It is not marketing speak for improved ROI by 192%, right? A success story is as simple as one of your reps closing a deal, and that's what we do at MindTickle, getting on the webcam and recording for 2 minutes, talking about the human side of the story, saying our prospect was Mary. She was a new sales enablement person at a fast-growing company, and she wanted to demonstrate impact. So she started evaluating how could she create consistent messaging in her sales team. And she did a 2-week test where it was apparent that in the SDR team, 9 out of 20 SDRs did not know how to leave a voicemail. Within 2 months, she went to the report to the CEO where she said, hey, MindTickle helped me create consistent messaging across my SDR team. She won and we got a deal, right? Now, that's the kind of flavor of content that teams need to be creating for their sales reps to weave it into their customer stories, right? And that's easy to create. What you need to do, and this is what I would recommend, turn the subject matter experts in your team into content creators. Don't ask them to create the best formatted videos with professional editing. Make everybody comfortable in their organization to start contributing content, right? So it's organic. The answer lies within the team that you have. It's not about waiting until your professional grade video recording artist joins the team or instructional designer joins the team. Every company ought to be creating a culture of sharing and contributing your knowledge back into a system, a repository of knowledge, a watering hole where salespeople come and they educate themselves.
I really like that word, a culture of sharing. I think that we talk about culture so often, and we talk about, well, what does culture mean and how do you do that? That's a very easy idea to get your arms around and to work. And I think we've all been in life enough to know that when people share information with us, it makes it so much better. And that's not about, the pop guns and the video, the drones and going out for drinks. All that stuff matters too. But real culture comes from sharing, and then that stuff will enable those pieces. So I thought that was great. So, have you figured out sort of, and this is a question actually coming from the audience, so I'm going to interrupt this a little bit. What's the best proven sales enablement method for B2B SaaS startups, right, by the founders? And I know we kind of touched on it a little bit, but I want to make sure that the question, the audience knows we're answering their specific question.
Right.
And so the question again, let me repeat it again, was, what's the best proven sales enablement method for B2B SaaS startups by founders?
Yeah. So by founders is the part that threw me off. So I'm assuming it's a company where you're transitioning from a founder-based selling to a scalable method where now you have a sales team that is scaling the go-to-market, right? So I'm going to assume that this is the question, right? And from a method perspective, I'm going to say, think of enablement as 3 core business processes. The first process is knowledge acquisition. The second process is creating consistent and impactful messaging. And third is ongoing reinforcement. So if you start looking at your enablement landscape from this lens of a 3-pillar approach, you will start prioritizing which area is weak or needs to be strengthened in your organization, and you start there, right? If it turns out that you have a transactional volume velocity selling model, you may have a shorter onboarding, a crisp 2-week onboarding with lot of attention to messaging. Because what you're doing is standardization, right? You're not having your sales reps do complex solution selling. What you're looking for is you have a machine that you built. This is your funnel. You've got 100 qualified opportunities, and you have a process by which you have 3 personas, 3 different, let's say you have a marketing automation product where going on the website, you've discovered that they are currently using this solution. So what value proposition do I have for a prospect who's already using a certain competing solution, right? So you're basically codifying the talk track for your sales team, and you're starting to see amazing results because now engine is scaling. You figured out the talk track. It's consistent across your team. You can start adding more people, and you can scale across locations. Now that's if you have a velocity selling model. If you have a complex selling model, go ahead, Richard.
No, go for it. Keep going.
Now I was saying, on the other hand, if you have a complex solution selling model, which is highly consultative in nature, right? Now you need to be referencing the right stories, right product stories on how ROI was created, the right stories where a certain example of a customer from the relevant sector, relevant industry was able to realize very strong business results, right? Being totally in the context of the prospect, right? Then your enablement in B2B SaaS is different. Then you're not investing into the codification of the message as a talk track. Then you're empowering your sales team to be up to date on the latest information. So which deal was closed recently? What was the success story? Where can I reference this? Which are my referenceable accounts that I should be talking about so that I can put them in touch with my prospect and get them talking, right? So again, I wish I had a silver bullet. It goes down to first principles. A founder should go back and look at what has gotten me so far. How have I been successful? And your answer will lie there. If you've been successful through a repeatable process, a marketing website-driven sales model, focus on the velocity and how enablement has a velocity strategy. If you've been successful by handicrafting every deal, being very intimate with the process and the prospect, being consultative, then your enablement strategy will have to be different. Like last I would say very briefly is a field sales force. If you have a large Yelp-like model where you have reps going and selling to restaurants, then focus on information and campaigns. What's going to sell is, I have this to offer you today. If you sign up today, Yelp is offering XYZ, right? So it's about recognizing what makes your sales rep successful and close deals and working backwards and designing your enablement strategy. So having the right people, process, and technology to support the design is going to be key on how that scales and how it becomes effective. But unfortunately, there's no silver bullet.
Got it. That's great. Would you do me, and by the way, that was the right assumption, according to the person who asked the question. You know, at the beginning of your answer, you said there are 3 things that need to occur, right? One was knowledge acquisition. Could you repeat those 3? Because I think that's something people would really like to make sure they walk away with.
Yeah. So those are 3 processes. So if you think about sales enablement as a business process, you need to be thinking of sub-processes within it. The first one is knowledge acquisition, right? And unfortunately, everybody gets fixated on making your reps knowledgeable, right? Now that's a fixation to the point where people start hating it and thinking of it as training, and sales reps hate being quizzed and tested and bombarded with content all the time. That's because you're not thinking about the whole picture. The whole picture is acquire knowledge, create consistent and impactful messaging, how that knowledge is being applied in the context of sales conversations, right? So that is where the scenario-based role play, audio recordings, video recordings, demo practice, right? Getting feedback from your managers, that business process becomes extremely important, right? And third is, we all like to believe that our sales reps are superhumans. They're going to remember everything through onboarding and training, everything from messaging. But the reality is they're like Dory in Finding Nemo, right? You tell me something and I've got attention deficit, right? I'm going to forget. So then the third process is ongoing reinforcement. How I'm providing the latest updates, I'm refreshing the information. If you actually did have a webinar on Monday, there's science that shows that if you follow up with a quiz and a follow-up 4 days later, not the next day, 4 days later, then you're going to aid recall and retention, right? So that ongoing cadence of bite-sized updates, sharing product updates as new features become available, new success stories as you close new deals, new stories from customer success team on how you supported and made a customer into a fan when everything was breaking down, right? Those stories, bite-sized, is a cadence of ongoing reinforcement. So that's the third process. So knowledge acquisition, consistent messaging, and ongoing reinforcement.
Sure. Great. So I want to move on. I know when we did our pre-interview, right, you were really conscious to talk about people, process, and technology.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Right? Because that's what all of this matters, right? And this is how it all gets executed, specifically around sales enablement. Can you give a little bit more detail around that? Can you share a little bit more with the group?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, absolutely. And, this is where, since then, there's another thought that occurred to me. So I'm going to expand that. It's about people, process, technology, and also the sales culture and executive sponsorship. So I'm going to talk about 4 things, not just people, process, technology, right? So we all know that it is not sufficient to purchase software and solve your problem, right? Software and technology is a piece of the puzzle, right? We all know that, right? It's even more true when it applies to sales enablement, because you're talking about collaboration across functions. You're talking about marketing, product, sales ops, customer success, product marketing, all of these functions working together to create the outcomes, which are shorter sales cycles, better win rates, faster ramp time, right? Now, in order to create this collaboration, you need people, which is either your sales ops person who's committing part of their time to enablement, or a dedicated sales enablement person, or in some cases, product marketing owning enablement. But it's important to be explicit and stated in the organization, not assumed and implicit, who is the owner of sales enablement. When enablement breaks, who is accountable? So that's the people side of the picture, right? Having accountability, a defined function, who owns the enablement process. The second is process. From a process perspective, if you think about the 3 business processes we talked about, right? Having a cadence where it is not episodic, you're revisiting the data. We haven't talked as much about analytics, right? But when you implement processes, somebody who owns, or it's a cadence in which you are revisiting the data and saying, are my new hires tracking their monthly milestones? If it's a 30, 60, 90-day plan, did they track their 30-day milestones, 60-day milestones? Having a process around when we published a new update to a corporate pitch, did the data demonstrate that this is being reflected in my sales conversations when the sales team is playing out? So processes and feedback loops is the second part of the picture. If you just have the people figured out and process not figured out, you're creating headless chickens. Your enablement person is going to be, running around, talking to sales reps, answering the same question over and over, right? Or doing manual measurement. The customers come in and say, we do Excel tracking of training. I said, great, okay. But how much time is it taking you to do that, right? Why would you do something for which technology has been solving for such a long time, right? So it's about getting the right processes in addition to people, and technology will amplify the effort. So the point is, if you got the right people and processes, the right technology will amplify your efforts. You'll have to hire lesser headcount to get the same impact. And more importantly, there's going to be less frustration. Who wants to do the minion job, right? People want to be effective and create outcomes. But the revelation I had since we talked is, while people process technology is a very popular framework, in this construct, if I go back to our most successful deployments, there are companies with a culture of sales excellence. right? So it's the Nutanix and App Dynamics where the sales leader right up to the CEO, they believe in enablement, being strategic to their organization. So in these organizations, right from the very top, the salespeople get a message, which is not draconian. It's not about do your training or else you'll be fired. The message is enablement is key for the success of an organization and for your own personal success. So when sales reps start getting that consistent messages from leadership, they believe that when they're provided an opportunity to either record themselves, get feedback from the manager, or go through a module or a channel partner needs to certify themselves, it's for their own success. So there's the four pieces: people, process, technology, and the sales culture and executive sponsorship for enablement. All four are key for a successful implementation of this approach.
Yep, I think that's great. How do you tell if it's working? What metrics are you tracking? What are those pieces?
Right. So with most things, this is also a funnel. And you have to be looking at metrics top down. So it starts with engagement. So you got to be measuring, when I'm creating these opportunities, are my sales team members taking advantage of it, right? Are they engaging with the content? It's key to have the managers be provided this visibility. So when a sales rep comes up to the manager and says, hey, you know what, I had a really tough quarter, I had all these challenges, and they're finding the challenges everywhere outside of their own performance. If you have the data to say this person is not even engaged. In this last quarter, we had 32 opportunities where this salesperson could have done self-development on MindTickle. And guess what? He's had less than 10% engagement. So clearly he's not engaged with the process. He doesn't value the opportunities that are being provided to them, right? Compared to somebody who's been highly engaged, their performance can be benchmarked and you can say, hey, it's highly correlated with engagement. But this is still functional. It's about, did the person participate, right? The second level of analytics and data you could be looking at is that of performance, where you see once they engaged, what was the success with that activity? So if it was a messaging exercise where the person had to respond to an objection, right? What score did they get? How did they benchmark compared to the bell curve of everybody else, right? So now you're not only looking at participation, you're saying, how did this person participate in these, perform in these activities? And the third, which is a holy grail, where I think most of our customers are trying to get to and we're enabling them, is outcomes. So then you start looking at ramp times, you start looking at win rates, and you start looking at activities. So how many of my qualified leads went to demo? How many went from demo to proposal, proposal to contract? And you start tying them into enablement activities and you start correlating them. So that's a holy grail. We are working towards it. There's a lot of investments in technology we have to do, a lot of investments in processes and data collection in Salesforce that our customers have to do. But we're looking at this as a progression and a continuum of maturity of the analytics and data.
Great. That's great. I've learned more about holy grails and headless chickens today than I have ever thought I would in a webinar. So thanks for sharing. Another question coming from the audience, which actually it does match our sort of next question. Question you and I were going to talk about next. We're sort of, what are the strengths you look for as you're choosing a platform for enablement, right? Like that stuff really matters. And I'd like to maybe put a little bit of context around that too, just based on the question I got from the audience, which is, understanding the difference between a CMS and an LMS system. If a company already has a robust content management system and it's very mobile friendly, right? Because the mobile space is particularly with field reps and outside reps matters a lot. And has tracking capabilities. How do you manage sort of that level versus maybe what a MindTickle can do? How do you potentially position a MindTickle against that? Especially when the mobile app is so heavily engaged and supported. And I'm not really asking. I don't think they're asking the question, is MindTickle have a mobile app? But I think there's some value to. They've spent a lot of time creating this thing, and now we're sort of saying, well, take what you've done and put it in a different place. So how would you look at a platform as a whole as you look at that particular piece?
Yeah. And I'm going to continue the theme of analogies. So I'm going to share the analogy of how we think of sales people as athletes. And everybody can relate with it because there's so much of traits that are common between athletes and salespeople, right? So once you get into that frame of mind, you ought to be thinking about what is the gym where my athletes work out, my salespeople work out. right? And what is the race where my salespeople run, right? So if you think about a CMS which allows you to share content with a prospect and then track, if it was a 10-page slide deck, did they spend 5 seconds or 50 seconds on the pricing slide? That is a capability which is the race. It's not a gym. That is an activity where you are in the middle of an opportunity and a sales rep is pursuing that prospect and running the race of that opportunity, right? A gym is where a salesperson is working out and building muscle. Muscle in terms of being more prepared for the sales conversation, knowing the right examples to quote in a sales conversation, knowing the product in and out, knowing the competition in and out, right? So when we think about the space we are playing in, MindTickle is the gym where salespeople work out. So again, goes back to the case study and success story. Your case studies sit in a CMS. You can share it to your prospects. It's a content repository which will do versioning. When you have multiple collaborators for marketing, you'll remember the version from 90 days back. It will also help you track every time it was clicked and opened from a almost marketing lens, right? Almost from an analytical lens, which is very, very refined for like one opportunity, one prospect at a time. Whereas if you're looking at patterns, you're thinking enablement. So that's where you're thinking success stories and not case studies on how I'm going to share that with the prospects, right? So if you think of the gym analogy, you start thinking about what are the different ways I could be making my salespeople more effective, not in one opportunity, but across all opportunities, right? So typically when we work with our customers, we ask them to keep their CMS. We integrate with the CMS where we could be embedding content from their existing content repository, right? So we integrate the Salesforce library, Dropbox, Box, Google Drive, whatever have you. We don't have to have that content reside in MindTickle necessarily. But what we are creating is a cadence in which this content is presented in the context of their learning cycle, right? The 3 business processes for onboarding, messaging, and ongoing reinforcement. So when a salesperson is getting on a flight, let's say field rep coming back home on a Thursday or Friday, they get on their mobile app on MindTickle, not to share with the prospect, but it's workout time. They'll cache it locally on the phone before they get on the flight. They look at the 3 updates that came from the product. One came from customer success. So it's a new product feature. It's a new success story. They locally cache it on the phone. They don't have Wi-Fi or 3G. And on the app, they could be spending 20 minutes going through it and making them better athletes. So that's the mental construct and analogy I would share. And I find that many companies start to look at one platform which can do everything. And we have learned in SaaS that best-in-class investments for a best-in-class CMS and a best-in-class enablement platform is better than starting to look for something which can do everything. And we're not big believers in that.
Great. I think that's really, really great. That's a great answer. We're getting close to the end. And I want to ask one more question, then we'll sort of tell everybody about the special offer that MindTickle has. So, what do the high-level results mean for someone in sales enablement, right? So whether that means the person's in charge of sales enablement or whether they're the rep or whether they're organization, what does that mean?
Yeah. And this brings up a very interesting larger discussion that we've been framing with the community at large, Richard, which is enablement function has been seen as a support function, right? Right from the days when you said it used to be called training, right? Now, how many CEOs have come from a training background in a technology company? Not many, right? So it's almost like a support function which could be seen as a cost center at times. Now, that's unfortunate. That's really unfortunate because we talked about the 8% top line improvement opportunity. We talked about 41-day ramp time reduction opportunity. So there is an opportunity for the larger enablement community to start this dialogue, this exchange of ideas on how they are driving revenue growth, how they are reducing churn, how they are driver of the business success of an organization. So then enablement people can be elevated, and I'm seeing that already with many of our customers, where enablement people are seen as a very critical function of the revenue side of the house. They are seen as people who can hold reps accountable. So it's not your reps carry quota, so they are the only people that matter in the organization, in the revenue side of the organization. Enablement starts getting its seat on the table. They get a lot of respect because they are making your soldiers, your frontline soldiers of the company more efficient and effective, right? So that's the larger discussion, that we've been trying to frame. But just tactically speaking, I think the correlations we talked about, where enablement activities correlating to activities of a salesperson, shaping behavior, shaping outcomes, the ratios across the funnel, and how providing these opportunities across those three processes, onboarding, consistent messaging, and reinforcement, is influencing your sales funnel, right? So once you become at a place where you have tracking, analytics, data, and the right processes, you can start having dashboards, and sales enablement people can publish weekly or monthly or quarterly reports, even to the CEO, and say, this is the impact that my function is bringing to your organization. And once it's visible, apparent, and very clear to everybody, the role of enablement is going to be uplifted significantly. And I can bet on it, that's happening very soon.
Great. That's really great. So, we're going to let people know about the special offer. I'll let you talk about that in a second. But if people want to get in touch with you, how can they get a hold of you? They find you on Twitter? Where do you want them to go? Want to email you? Want to give out your cell phone number?
Absolutely, all of the above. But right. I think the more efficient ways of getting in touch is following our Twitter handle, which is MindTickle, and my personal handle, which is MOHGAR, Mogar. We do publish a lot of these insights that we shared with the audience today. So we look for feedback, reactions, and keeping this dialogue going. We're obviously very, very excited about engaging with the community, with our prospects, customers, competitors, who have you. It is a larger mission that we're looking to accomplish. So really look for those opportunities and touch points.
That's great. And congrats on all the success you've had in the last few years. It's been fun to sort of speak to you every few months and hear about what's going on and how you guys are really shaping the sales enablement community. It's really, really great. So with that being said, so what's the special offer? What can people walk away with going, hey, I might want to give MindTickle a look or a try? What do you guys have for everybody?
Yeah, absolutely. And we went back to the team and we said, for this webinar, what is something interesting that we could create? And we found that there's so many opportunities where we went in and we started by offering a current state assessment of where their sales teams are in terms of messaging, in terms of knowledge. So again, the process we talked about. So what we're offering is a free, no obligations opportunity to leverage MindTickle to deliver a scientific test on knowledge and messaging. So the first piece will be a multi-part exercise where you could test them on product knowledge, process knowledge, all the areas which are important for their success in the sales conversations, and take your top 3 or 5 sales scenarios, whether it's elevator pitches, presenting the value proposition, voicemail, objection handling, and getting a sense of how many of your reps are making the cut, how many have development areas or gaps. Now you can address them on your own, or obviously MindTickle can help you address those. An example I would say is one of our prospects had 20 SDRs, and we went and ran this audit, and we found only 9 of the 20 could make a passable voicemail, right? So imagine they're dialing out 40 calls every hour, and only 40% had a pass score from the sales leader on the voicemail that they were leaving. Right. So having that data, I think, is huge value that we can offer right out of the gate. And obviously, then we can talk about how we remediate when we do find gaps, right? Just audit. And
so really, that first piece is just really helping people identify just where their knowledge gap exists within their own core, within their own group. That's great. And then there was, and then you also had something else around the audio video piece, the role play piece, which I know role play is totally turned around than what it was 5 years ago, where people are excited to do it and want to do it. So you guys have something that can help people with that too, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. So like we talked about, knowledge acquisition is the only thing that you should be caring about. It's about how that knowledge is being applied in the context of sales conversations. So we have an offering where you can codify the scenarios, and now you can have reps learn from the best reps in the team, or the sales leader can provide an example on how you handle a certain objection or present in a certain buyer persona or vertical situation. So you can have standardization of messaging. You can find out messaging gaps. So part of our assessment offer is we will take your 5 scenarios and have them run with your team, and you get all the data based on the assessment by the managers and the product marketing team on which reps have messaging gaps in which area. So that's we're very excited about providing this as a free offer as well.
That's great. So basically, they can get to you guys and talk about understanding the subject areas for their gap analysis, and then also here's something you can actually use today and tomorrow to actually improve performance right away without just as a free offer. So that's really, really wonderful. I know we're going to have a link and a landing page that's going to go out in the post email, in the post webinar email, so people will be on the lookout for that. If not, certainly be sure to get in touch with Mohit on Twitter or MindTickle on Twitter, and I'm sure they'll be glad to take care of you. So
absolutely.
So Mohit, on behalf of Sales Hacker and the whole Sales Hacker community and those who listen, thank you so much. We really appreciate your time today. And we hope everybody has a good end of the quarter and look forward to folks really, really, kicking off Q2 with really focusing on some sales enablement activities.
That's right. Yeah, it was a pleasure to be on this webinar and always good to talk to you, Richard. And thank you, audience, for taking the time and for your questions. It was a pleasure.
All right. Thank you, everybody. We appreciate what the audience asked. Those were great questions. Have a good week, everybody. Bye-bye.
Yeah, have a great week. Thank you. Bye-bye.